So hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. My name is Megan Levita, and I'm a program developer here at Kirkwood Corporate Training. Joining us today to present on Presenting Like a Pro is Robert Rathje. Robert is a purpose-driven, results-focused HR professional who is passionate about helping people and organizations achieve their full potential. Leveraging his diverse experiences in strategic and operational HR, he skillfully drives design and deploys holistic end-to-end solutions that achieve positive outcomes for both profit and people. Throughout his career, he has consistently translated strategies into actions, theory into practical application, and solutions into meaningful results. Robert has an MBA from the University of Iowa, Master Trainer Certification from the Association for Talent and Development, ATD for those in the know, a SHRM CP certification from the Society for Human Resource Management, and Change Management certification from Cotter International. Robert is also an active community champion who serves on various workforce and economic development boards, as well as contributes his time and talents through other community engagements. Robert's passion for helping others originates from growing up on his family farm right outside of Cedar Rapids. As part of a fifth-generation farming family with 2 Century Farms, he has seen how hard work, continuous improvement, and a strong community can build a meaningful legacy that will live on. This experience has fundamentally shaped his purpose to help others achieve their full potential so that they can build their own legacy that will live on. Robert and his wife, Taylor, have 2 kids, Rowan and Harlow, with a 3rd little one on the way. In his free time, Robert is training for a 10K, is actively engaged in the community, and enjoys doing his dad duties, such as telling dad jokes, building forts, and being a master Hot Wheels track builder. That is quite an accomplishment. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Robert, to take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Megan. And hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session on Presenting Like a Pro, your practical guide for high-impact presentations. I'm incredibly excited to be here with you all as we focus on this important everyday skill of presenting. And to set the stage for this conversation and to get us familiar with the Zoom chat box right away, I'm going to start with a couple of exercises to kick off our conversation. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to share a specific percentage with you. And what I want you to do is to actually think about, what do you think this percentage represents? So if you could find your way to the chat box within Zoom, and the specific percentage I want to share with you is 10%. So using the chat box, tell me what you believe 10% represents in the context of presentations. And I'll be pulling your answers into the conversation here as we go. So when you're ready, use the chat box to tell me what you believe 10% represents within the context of presentations. Ten percent memorization. Excellent. What else? If your chat box is disabled, please use the Q&A, and I can also answer those as we go throughout it as well. Thank you, Robin, for pointing that out. I do appreciate that, so we can continue to navigate this together. Most effective. Great. Excellent. What else? Information retained, the confidence. Yes, all of these are really good. 10% of information retained, 10% what people will remember. Yes, so you understand what 10% represents, right? It's how much people remember from a presentation just 1 week after it happens. Let's put this statistic into a work context. I want you to imagine with me that you've been tasked to give a specific presentation around a new process, product, idea, or strategy. You spent days, weeks sometimes, even preparing the graphs, the tables, and the talking points for this presentation. You spent hours rehearsing this leading up to the big day. And at the end of your presentation that day, you're eagerly waiting for some formal approval or at least some positive feedback that you're heading in the right direction. Instead, however, you're met with glossed over eyes, comments that they need more time to digest this information, and really a commitment to get back to you about their thoughts on the presentation. All of a sudden, 1 week passes, and you're still waiting for their input. So you decide to check in with them. And in that conversation, they begin asking questions that you know for a fact you covered in the presentation. So the question is, was our presentation successful? Despite our best efforts, our recommendation isn't moving forward quite yet, and they really didn't absorb the key information that we spent countless hours preparing. Hi, my name is Robert, and I've been there too. And this is why I'm so incredibly passionate and excited to be here with you all as we focus on ways to increase our confidence and competence when it comes to presenting. I've been on a quest to learn how I can best inspire an audience towards action based upon my presentation. And after today's session, I'm going to invite you on that quest with me as we look to inspire audiences that we're working with every day. And to ensure I'm giving you the right tools and the resources that you need to conquer the road, as well as all of us conquering that journey together, I want to start by asking you a couple of questions around what was the benefit you were looking to receive, and what are you hoping to gain from today's conversation? So if you could go back to the Q&A or the chat box, and I want you to share what's 1 to 2 things you're hoping to learn from our conversation here today. When you're ready, write in the chat box. Excellent. Thank you, Robin. Ways to improve the presentation skills. We're going to talk about the key models and practices that we can do that. How to build confidence in our presentations. Excellent. What else? Ways to present effectively. Better ways to communicate. Ways to hold attention in the presentation. This is great. Keep it coming. How to communicate more effectively and build that confidence to do so. We're going to talk a lot about that. How to adequately prepare for a presentation. Yes, engaging those participants. We're going to talk a lot about that today as well. And the ways to build that buy-in with our teams. So this information is incredibly helpful because this is going to help me know where I should focus my attention as we go throughout today's conversation. And that's exactly what this is. Today is a two-way conversation where we're going to focus on ways to build our competence and confidence when it comes to presenting skills. And even though I can't see you, I can see your chats, and I'm going to continue to weave those into the conversation. So keep the comments, the questions, and ideas flowing as we go throughout the conversation. So with the stage set and a couple of practice opportunities early on for the Zoom chat box, let's dive into how we can build and deliver high-impact presentations with a 3-step model known as the ACT model. This is a model that I use to ensure I stay focused on the end goal of inspiring audiences towards an action. The ACT model stands for analysis, content, and talking with our audience versus at our audience. Specifically today, we're going to learn how to effectively analyze our audience as well as the situational context surrounding our presentation. Then we're going to focus on the content. How do we build that in a consumable, effective way? And then lastly, we're going to learn strategies and tactics to help you effectively prepare for your presentation, which then allows you to more naturally talk with your audience when you're actually delivering it. We're also going to learn different strategies and tactics to manage the interactions during the presentation so you can handle that more naturally as well. And to make sure that we're applying what we're learning here today, I'm going to invite all of you to think about one presentation that you have that you're currently preparing for, or maybe one presentation that you just delivered and you want to use as a reflection point to see how you performed in that presentation. So I'm going to give you a second here, and I want you to think about one presentation that you're going to be preparing for, or one that you recently have done that you want to apply this content to. And when you have it, write "got it" in the chat box. Excellent. Seeing quite a few guys come in. This is great. Let's keep on moving then. So with this real life example in our minds, let's jump into analysis. Successful presentations start with successful analysis. The first step is to really identify the main purpose of the presentation. There are 3 general types of presentation purposes. The first one is to inform or educate our audience. Most of the presentations that we experience on a day-to-day basis are around that informative or educational component from a presentation standpoint. In our own working worlds, this is usually when our manager will reach out to us and say, hey, can you share a progress update? Or can you share your findings with the department leadership team? Or can you train a peer on a topic? So these are common working examples when it comes to the purpose of informing. The second purpose is to persuade or motivate an audience. This is a common presentation purpose, whether we're trying to get people to buy into a recommendation, buy a solution or a product, or really try to gain buy-in from our manager even to a proven idea that we do have overall. The last one is to entertain. So this is what we may see at wedding speeches, kickoff to corporate events, or any situation where we want people to just have a good time, right? Now we're probably thinking to ourselves, this seems pretty basic. Why is this distinction important? This distinction is important because the purpose of the presentation informs the goal of the presentation. And the purpose and presentation goal then inform the content that we're actually going to be developing when we get to the content stage. Let's talk about a work context example here that we can apply this to. And I want you to remember this example because we're going to use it here in a couple slides as well. Let's say our manager comes to us and wants us to come to a departmental leadership meeting to present a new process improvement recommendation. Our manager has communicated with us that the leadership team has little to no background on the actual current issue, but there's one member who actually has a lot of context, right? So there's one that has a lot of context, and that's because this person created this process 5 years ago before he was promoted into the leadership team. So the leadership team, including the one who actually created the process, believes that everything's working fine and that they just don't quite understand the inefficiencies of the current process. And your manager is requesting your help to convince them that there is inefficiencies and there's negative effects associated with that current project or current process. And that's why we need to embrace a new one. Oh, and by the way, we have 15 minutes to do so. Does that sound familiar? Now, I don't know about all of you, but when I hear this type of scenario, I'm really sometimes guilty of just jumping right into building the content, the graphs, the tables, the talking points to prove the recommendation right. However, when I slow down to reflect on the situation, will jumping right in really serve the purpose of the presentation well? Based upon what the manager has just told me, we have two things that we're going to be doing in that 15-minute presentation: informing the leadership team of the current issues of the current process and persuading them to build or to recommend and approve that new process, right? That reasonably can't be done in 15 minutes or less. So if our purpose of the presentation is to truly persuade our audience to buy into that recommendation, this will then inform the content we need to build. It also helps us understand what's the information and the context that we need to give that leadership team before we actually go into that presentation. If we can't inform and persuade in 15 minutes, then we need to perform or persuade them in the meeting, but inform them as we go into that conversation overall. A lot of times this is done through email, pre-meeting, or even the manager having a one-on-one conversation with the leadership team members to make sure that they have the information that they need to move into that presentation. So as we think about our presentations that we just all individually identified, think about your individual presentations and what's the main purpose of it. So when you're ready, think about what is the presentation purpose that you have? Is it inform, persuade, or entertain? What is the main presentation purpose of the one that you have identified? And when you're ready, write in the chat box. Seeing quite a bit of inform, excellent, a lot of informs. Inform, but also adding a little entertainment there. I like that. I like that. Persuade, that's another good one too. Yep. Train, excellent. All right. So with the purpose of our presentation identified, we can get more specific about our goal. And then when we have a clear understanding of the presentation purpose and goal, now we can understand how do we want to approach the audience to build an effective message for our content, right? So let's talk about how we can analyze the situation and the audience overall. When I sit down to reflect on the audience and the situation, I personally take time to reflect on what I call the head, the heart, and the how. The head is focused on logic. What do the people know? And what is their perception of the topic? The heart focuses on emotion. What do people believe about this topic? How do they feel about this topic? And how is that going to influence their reactions as well as maybe their responses to the discussion of the presentation we're about to give? The how is focused on behavior. What do people do or how do they act? And what decisions will be impacted by this presentation or this, at least this conversation around a certain topic that we're giving? So before every presentation I give, I sit down and use the lens of the head, the heart, and the how to reflect on where people are coming from before the presentation and how I want them to think, feel, and act after the presentation is done. I usually practice perspective taking based upon the size of group. So if it's a smaller group with 10 people or less, I will actually sit down and try that perspective taking for every individual in that meeting. If it's a larger group, then I focus on, okay, what's the key groups that I need to be considering as I build this presentation? The reason why this framework has been really effective for me, and I believe it will be for you as well, is because it really allows me to think about the content of where people are at before, what's the content I need to provide to then move them to where I want them to be after the presentation. And when I can do this analysis of before and after, I can develop the right message, ensure I only include the most relevant content, use tangible examples that will relate with the audience, use the appropriate tone, and actually pre-plan ways to answer certain questions to make sure that I'm always prepared for the items in the moment. The bottom line is that this framework allows us to understand where people are coming from and where we want them to end up, so that way we can build the right content in our next step. Before we jump into content, let's actually apply this framework to a real life example. So going back to our process improvement recommendation, We know that we're here to meet with the departmental leadership team meeting in 15 minutes or less. We're going to talk about, here's this recommendation. Can we get your approval in 15 minutes or less? The leadership team has little to no background except for one member of the leadership team that actually created this process 5 years ago that we now believe is no longer effective, and we're seeking to implement a new recommendation. For the specific group of leadership team members who didn't create the process, they're really entering the conversation with little to no awareness of the issue. They feel like things are pretty good, right? And that they're here to do business as usual, meaning execute the process as is. After the presentation, we want this group to be aware of the issues, understand that things are not as good as it looks, as well as our recommendation is better, and to give us that formal approval and to implement that new recommendation. The question is, though, this is a pretty straight level analysis or straightforward analysis for the high level analysis of the group. But the question becomes, what about the leadership team member who did create the process and has history with it, right? We know we want this person to come to the conclusion that there's issues with the process, that things are not good and our recommendation is better, and to approve and implement the new recommendation. But in order to get that person there with the other leadership team members, what is this person's perspective that we need to blend to make sure that we're actually accounting for that as we build our content overall? So using the chat box, I want you to tell me what you think this person's perspective is before the meeting that we need to take into account so we can design content effectively. When you're ready, write it in the chat box. Excellent. As you are putting your thoughts into the chat box there, I had a great question come in around my thought process for this presentation and the perspective taking that I took. And as we think about this presentation overall, I definitely thought in broader groups, right? This is our first time we're connecting, the first time we're doing the presentation. And I thought about, okay, where are we at in terms of skill level when it comes to the presentation? And how do I help inspire? So that's the knowledge. The heart piece is how do I help inspire them to embrace these principles, to take it forward and actually apply them to their day-to-day using the live example as well. Excellent. Okay, so a few answers in here too. They did not want to change their idea to the process because they thought of all the solutions. They're here focusing on, hey, I'm the subject matter expert, so I already knew that I explored all the options and variables, and this is the best route. Good ideas. They have ownership of the process, so they're personally invested in that, right? So even through a 2-minute high-level analysis of this one individual who understands that ins and outs of the process, we can see that we're going to have to design our content in a way that honors and respects the past while also building and evolving the process for the future, right? So the content that we're actually going to be providing needs to be very cognizant of that personal perspective to make sure that we can make sure this person lands where we want them to be after the presentation overall. So even with this strategic analysis, we can see that we're going to build this content according to the personal perspectives in that meeting, the organizational culture, as well as other contextual details. And the head, the heart, and the how really allows us to do that strategic analysis of each individual in that meeting or key groups in that meeting overall. And before we move into content, I also want to touch on some tactical considerations to analyze as you prepare for conversations. There's the first one that I think about is like, when is this meeting taking place? And will that impact my audience's attention or attendance? So I usually sit down and look at my calendar. Whenever I have those presentations, I look, is it in the morning when people are fresh? Is it in the afternoon when people are exhausted? Is it on a Monday? Is it on a Friday? Will these people be coming from a meeting that's very information heavy? And how does that influence the way that I need to present? The second thing I really think about is how will people attend and how do I ensure a smooth presentation flow? Will I use a PowerPoint? Will I have a handout? How am I going to capture ideas and interact with the audience throughout the conversation? The third thing I focus on is how am I going to prepare the audience for the presentation? So going back to the process improvement recommendation, this is how do I give them the information to the background, the analysis, the ideas around why the current process is insufficient and why we need to focus on the new process in our 15 minutes together. And then the fourth thing is how am I going to follow up after the presentation? This is where I spend time thinking about where I want them to be after the presentation and where they're coming from before the presentation. And then I map out 1, 2, 3 different routes I can take when it comes to next steps after the presentation is complete. And what that does is that really allows me to then analyze the situation, pre-plan those, and I can flex in the moment when I am delivering effectively. So through strategic consideration of the head, the heart, and the how, and tactical consideration of these different variables, we can now understand where the audience is at which then allows us to think about the content we need to build to keep it consumable and practical. So let's move into the content piece of our conversation, because with strong analysis comes strong content. And when I think about content, I usually simplify this into two main focuses. What do I want my message to be? And how should I design the content to be consumable and effective? And as we go throughout our section here, I want you to keep your example that you identified at the forefront of your mind. The details of your specific presentation are specific to you. So I'm going to provide you with principles and practices that you can use when building your content to make sure, again, it's effective and consumable. Let's start with the message approach. Now, when I say message, I'm not speaking in terms of sending a text, leaving a voicemail, and so on. I'm talking about what's the key theme that you want to deliver, or what's the story that you're looking to tell the audience. Now, through our use of the head, the heart, and the how, the message is really the bridge between the before and after, right? We talked about that a little bit. And when we think about our message, we need to have one clear theme with a max of 3 key points. And much like a triangle is the strongest geometric shape, the strongest messages are approached with 3 core components in mind. The first is structural simplicity. What I mean by this is to build your message in a way that's easy to follow. I'm going to talk more tactically about how to do that on the next slide, but I feel like this is very significant because in a lot of our presentations, we have tables, graphs, several bullet points about the different findings or ideas that we may have, right? This leads to general information overload, which then makes it harder for the individual to follow the presentation. Additionally, as we think about structural simplicity, we want to create the journey from start to finish in a way that makes sense and it can be easy to follow. And then communicating that structure so people know what to expect and can follow that conversation overall. The second component is visual. Now, as humans, we generally remember and resonate more with visuals, pictures, than we do with words, right? In addition, goes beyond pictures. This is how do we help them visualize this scenario or understand the scenario through an analogy or a story that you're sharing with. And then the third component is authentic. A lot of times as we think about authenticity, we may have seen some of those scenarios where a person used a joke, a story, or an example that they learned somewhere else and they tried to actually deliver it, but it didn't quite land right. And all of a sudden the audience are kind of cringing about that. So we've seen that. And the key here is that authenticity is really important because we have a conscious message that we're delivering, which is the words, the talking points, the ideas. And then we have our subconscious messaging, which is, again, how we say it, our confidence level, the way we're actually delivering that tone. And this is really important that we have alignment there to make sure that it's effective. And that's where authentic delivery comes into play. So let's use this presentation as an example of this. So leveraging this message approach, there's one clear theme of delivering high impact presentations. With this clear theme, I've introduced the ACT model, which includes analysis, content, and talk with. As we think about structural simplicity, I've made sure that I had a key transition slide for every piece of the ACT model to make sure that we can mentally make that shift to the next piece of content. And I've really been delivering this content in a visual way, not only with graphics, but I've already engaged your imagination with some scenarios about 3 to 4 times in our time together. And as we think about this, I've also been delivering this in a way that's authentic to me, maybe without the dad jokes, but I've definitely been delivering it in a way that's authentic to me overall. So these are really strong principles that you can use to build effective messages and content that you're able to deliver authentically. Now let's talk about actually how you design that principle and the practices to do that effectively. So with every presentation, there's a clear opening, main content, and closer. When it comes to design, I'm going to actually introduce one principle for every phase, and then also the key practices that you can use. When it comes to opening the presentation, the main principle here is the 2-minute rule. In every presentation, you have 2 minutes or less to let people know that you're well organized, you know your stuff, you understand the audience, and that you're not going to waste their time. The most effective openings follow a general framework. First, there is a hook. This is usually a story, interesting statistic, a thought-provoking question, or an analogy that resonates with the audience. This is then followed by the objective of the presentation and the benefit that they're going to receive for that presentation. And at the end, you have an agenda which then transitions into the content. So let's look at this presentation, for example. I set today's conversation with an interesting statistic of 10%, followed by a common scenario that we engage our imagination and that we could all resonate with. This allowed me to set the stage for the objective. And then to highlight the benefit, I actually invited your perspective into that conversation so you could personalize your why to why you're attending here today. All of this did take time more than 2 minutes or so, right? But it did allow me to set the stage by using the ACT model and then transition into the content more smoothly. The 2-minute rule is really a guideline. It's really designed to cut the fluff. So as you think about ways to engage your audience, if you do engage them early and often, you're doing great, because then that way they're not focusing on the Microsoft Teams, emails, or messages that are coming their way overall. So with a strong opener, we can move to the main content. Here, the principle is the 10-second rule. In the first 10 seconds, your PowerPoint, your handout, whatever it may be, should really convey the main concept in 10 seconds or less. In all of my slides, you're noticing that I have my title come in first, and that's usually just a couple words that allow you to say, like, here's what we're going to focus on this before I then introduce more content overall. So as we think about the practices associated with that, it's really important that we follow the first principle, which is one focus per slide. We can remember all those presentations that have every inch of that slide filled up, right? And the key here is, how do we simplify every slide down to one focus? Because it's not about the quantity of slides, it's about how many focuses are on one slide at a time, right? So if we want one focus per one slide, one rule that we can follow is the 1-6-6 rule. So for every one focus or slide, we should have no more than 6 bullet points with 6 words max, or no more than 36 words total. This is really important because of what we call the redundancy effect. If we have slides that have sentences written out, and we're also saying those sentences out loud, the brain's working memory is overloaded, and they can't actually focus on what you're saying and or what they're reading, so therefore not retaining any of it. So for us to make sure that our words are landing and that our message is being delivered effectively, we should focus on one slide or one focus per slide with no more than 6 bullet points and 6 words max. To make sure and to force ourselves to do that, because I don't know about you, sometimes I have struggles with that. I really focus on using 24 plus font. This really forces me to make sure I'm using concise wording and able to then package the information effectively on the slides. Lastly, when designing your main content, it's really important that you focus on attention direction for the audience. During the presentation, sometimes we move slide by slide by slide with no animations or no way to direct the attention. So we see all this information come in and we're overwhelmed by that, and we can't follow the words and the slide at the same time. The two main ways that I do this is, number one, using animations. So as you can see, as I go throughout the presentation, I'm actually bringing in information incrementally when it's relevant to the talking point. The other piece of that is it actually activates your brain's ability to track movement, and that's like the tendency that we tend to have, right? So as soon as that movement comes on screen, then our brains fixate on that talking point, and then what you're saying is providing that additional context. The other piece of this, the second piece, is really the contrast. So, and a lot of times I've seen this a few different ways. We have a slide that has data or something that's really content heavy that we need to make sure is all on one slide. So you can use things like highlighting your words, changing it to a different color, blurring out the data that you don't want to use. And this really allows you to then focus on, here's what I want to communicate with them, and that audience can focus on that area so you have a good discussion on the content overall. So as we think about the main content, that usually leads to that strong closure. And the main principle here is focusing on next steps. How many of us are guilty of ending a meeting or a presentation and saying, I'm going to follow up with you after the meeting with an email, only for that email to be lost in our inboxes, right? So in that conversation, it's really important that we communicate next steps to make sure that we know that there's additional work that needs to be done as we move forward. So the way you can do that is really by summarizing your key theme and your 3 key points, and then talk about what is the next step. No matter if it's an inform, a persuade, or an entertain, what is the next step? Maybe it's that you'll follow up with more details around the tracking of the metrics, or maybe it's something that, hey, here's a process improvement recommendation, and here are the next steps that we need to do to get this across the finish line. So I just covered a lot of ground on one slide. This was intentional. As you look at this slide, does this slide feel more congested and more busy than the slides I've been giving so far? Probably so, right? Because I broke quite a few of my main content design principles. I have more than one focus per slide, more than 6 bullet points, and even though I have 24 plus font, it's still very busy as you look at this slide overall. Again, I wanted you to see the real-time difference and feel of this content versus the previous slides that I was sharing overall. So with this comes the end of our content section. And I've seen a lot of people talking about talking with the audience and what that looks like, right? And I'm super excited to dive into some of these strategies and tactics to do so. So let's talk about talking with the audience versus at the audience. I do see a question here. What software are you using to design your slide design? This is Microsoft PowerPoint all the way through. And if you want to explore that further, I can definitely connect with you one-on-one just to talk about maybe the ways I leverage Microsoft PowerPoint, and we can work through that together. So let's move into talking with our audience versus at our audience. The reason why I like this conversation around talking with is that it really makes sure that the conversation, the message, the presentation is a two-way conversation. It includes people in the conversation so they can get engaged with the topic at hand. And again, unless you're like a keynote speaker, most presentations are involving those day-to-day interactions overall. So we're going to talk more about ways to do that. When it comes to delivering our presentations in a way that we can talk with our audience, there's really two main things I want to focus on today. If I had more time, I would think about things like voice inflection, tone, authentic delivery style, and so forth. But these are really advanced skills that require a deeper dive. The two items I really want to focus on today to make sure that we can talk with our audience when we're delivering are preparation for the actual delivery and then managing interactions when those conversations are happening. Why these two areas? Because 75% of people have a anxiety around delivering and presenting topics. Over 85% actually have that intense anxiety to a point where it's paralyzing, right? So as you think about this, we need to think about how can we prepare for our presentation effectively? And then how do we do that through preparation, which then allows us to be more natural in our flow and also manage those interactions throughout the conversation together. So let's jump into delivery preparation. Now, for the sake of giving you the opportunity to screenshot this process so you can take it with you, I'm actually going to break my design principle of 6 bullet points with 6 words max. And as I continue to deliver presentations on a weekly basis, much like many of you probably do as well, I've been working to systematize how I prepare for these, right? Here's the process that I use that I think will also be beneficial for you as well. The first thing I do is I build the presentation materials and write my script word for word. This includes the transitions, time allotted per slide, and the precise message that I want to follow. Then I actually read the script out loud while I'm actually presenting and adjust to my natural speech. Sometimes there's things that I'll write that trip me up in how I actually will say it in real life. So I practically adjust those to make it more natural in my delivery. The third thing I do is then I rehearse my script in the day of format. So if I'm in person, I'll actually go to the room and that will allow me to see like the different logistical things I need to take into consideration during the presentation so I can work through all those components. Same with the virtual. If I'm in a virtual room, I'll actually set up myself up a meeting and I'll actually walk through all the details to make sure that I can see everything that I need to be effective and focus solely on delivery on the day of. After I rehearse this script in the day of format, then I only actually rehearse the script with only checking in after every major section. So for this presentation, I would check in after the analysis, the content, and then the talk with. And I would check in to make sure I hit all my key points after I rehearsed it. And then the last thing I do is I rehearse without the script from start to finish to make sure that I'm hitting all my key points and that even though I'm not saying everything precisely the way that I wrote it, I still have that ability to flex and actually make sure that I'm landing the key points that I want to share with my audience. As you go throughout this preparation process that I shared with you, it's really important to know a few things. The first one is I prioritize my preparation according to the presentation importance. If this is a high stake presentation, I would go through all 5 of these to a T. If this is like, hey, this is just with my peers versus executive leadership, then I'll focus on how can I refine this down just to make sure that we're delivering something effectively, but also like prioritizing our time, right? Because time is of the essence. If you're more of a go with the flow presenter, steps 3 through 5 are still beneficial because you're focusing on the day of logistics, so you can still focus on the delivery in the moment, which is such a critical piece. And then the last 2 are really maybe more reminders, perhaps. The first is you are the expert of the materials you put together. A lot of times we experience this imposter syndrome because we're like, am I really the expert on presentation skills? But as you think about this, you are the expert of the materials you're putting together. So you know your talking points, you know what works for you, and you're going to be able to deliver that in a way that's authentic to you. And this is important because no one has ever missed something they never knew was there. This means that while you may have missed a talking point, while you may have missed a transition statement, don't worry about it. Tie it into the future conversation. A lot of times I think what happens is we get caught up in that and we slow down. We're like, oh, now I'm hurried, or now I gotta miss this transition point, or now I get nervous, right? And that throws the entire presentation flow off. Take time to slow down, tie that into a future talking point, and continue to deliver that overall. When I was told this advice, I stopped focusing on delivering everything perfectly and started delivering everything more authentically, and it would allow me to be more relaxed in my presentation skills overall. So with this preparation process that I want to pass along to you as a practical tip, it's such a critical piece because presentations build the preparation around that builds confidence and competence on not only the flow, but also the delivery. So you can flex in the moment to deliver the talking points as they naturally come to you in the moment. And it really allows you to talk with your audience and a conversation to make sure it's effective overall. With effective preparation, let's shift our focus to managing interactions in the moment. So now that we've focused on, again, those key areas of where we can focus on preparation, the 4 strategies to manage the interactions while you're actually in the conversation is to simply, number 1, start by restating and answering the question. Usually our natural impulse is to jump in right away without providing the answer when asked. We should, however, restate the question to all who are in the meeting and make sure that there's that good context heading into how we answer the question. So for example, what I usually do is I actually combine it with a compliment. If we use the process improvement recommendation example, I'll say something to the effect of, hey, great question about the potential challenges we may run into as we implement this recommendation. Here's what we've identified so far. And then you respond with the details. It's really the purposeful restating of what was said to drive clarity on what's going to be discussed moving forward. The second thing is to further explore, right? So there's going to be a few questions that are so broad or maybe not quite detailed enough that we can actually answer that effectively. So this is where that tell me more about technique comes into play. I will simply say something to the effect of, hey, that's a really great question. Can you tell me more about what you mean by X? Or, hey, thank you for sharing your input. Can you tell me more about what you mean by Z? This not only ensures they have a good understanding of the question, but also they have time to think about your response to that question. Additionally, as you think about this, it also allows you to refine the focus of the conversation. If it's such a broad piece, you may answer one component that's not necessarily what they are looking for. So it allows you to refine the focus and deliver the information that they're looking for. The third technique is the relay technique. So during presentations, there may be questions that are better directed towards a subject matter expert in that topic. So instead of feeling like you have to hurry and respond and you don't know if it's going to be a 100% correct answer, you can simply direct that question to that individual. So this sounds something like, hey, great question. I do have thoughts, but I'd love to hear Bob's perspective on this because of his experience and expertise. Or, hey, thanks for sharing your input or your idea here. Jan, what are your thoughts on this, right? So you can use this to relay the question to the right subject matter expert and still maintain control of the presentation delivery overall. And then the fourth is the rain check. So there's going to be certain questions that you don't have the answer to, right? That's just the fact of the matter. Usually what happens is we try to fight that pressure of answering right in the moment, right? So we have something that's rambling, something that's hurried, and it may not necessarily be a complete information that you're giving back to that individual. So as you think about this, the people want the right answer, even if it's not right away in the moment. So you can use something like, hey, great question. I need to confirm a few details with my team. I'm going to send that to you after the meeting, or something to that effect to really highlight that you're going to give them the answer, but you don't have all the information that you need right now. So these are 4 core strategies that can be applied in any presentation or any conversation to manage those normal interactions, right? But we do know that there's sometimes challenging situations that we need to navigate as well. So let's walk through 4 core examples. The first one is the dominator, right? This is the person who monopolizes the entire conversation to a point where others can't contribute. So here are your strategies to find a window to thank them for their input and then quickly move to who else has thoughts they'd like to share, or what else are we not considering that we should be considering, right? Now, there's going to be times where we have to actually like politely interrupt. And this is where you can just do something as simple as like, hey, Robert, thank you so much for your passion and energy around this. I want to connect with you one-on-one to dive deeper. For the sake of time in our agenda, I do want to make sure we capture everyone's ideas though. And then you pivot to who else has thoughts they would like to share. The second type is the rambler. This is the person that starts at this point and goes down the rabbit hole on different topics that are related, but not quite the scope of the conversation. So, for example, this could sound like, hey, Tony, you just showcased how much of a robust plan we need to have in place to ensure successful implementation of this new process. Today, we're really focusing on just the overall approval of the recommendation, and we're going to jump into the details after we get that. I did like, however, how you mentioned that's going to save a lot of time for those who are actually executing the process, and that's why we should focus on the approving this recommendation here today. The third type is the digressor. So this is the person who starts on topic and quickly veers off course. And here you want to find the opportunity to thank them for the energy and enthusiasm and then take it offline with a one-on-one afterwards. And the last but not least is the so-called expert. This is the person who believes that their answer is the right answer, and they're going to continue to let you know it in the conversation as well. Here you really want to recognize their interest, enthusiasm, and thoughts and acknowledge those, but you don't necessarily have to agree with what they're saying because it may not necessarily be aligned to the conversation overall. So this may sound something like, "Hey, John, I can tell that you have a lot of ideas and energy around this. I would love to meet with you one-on-one to really dive into this a little bit more. But let's think about our agenda here today and let's get back on focus on those items that we're going to be focusing on here in this conversation." So with that comes the end of how to talk with our audience by, again, preparation as well as managing those interactions with our audience. And that's the end of our journey here today. I know it was a quick rundown of everything that we were going to talk about from A to the C to the T, but our journey of inspiring an audience towards action is really just beginning, right? So as we think about our conversation, we went through analysis where we talked about the purpose of the presentation, the goal of the presentation, as well as leveraging the head, the heart, and the how more. We then focus on content. And while that's specific to your example, we thought about ways that we can actually make it more digestible and consumable through principles and practices. And then we dove into ways that we can think about preparing for the presentation as well as delivering effective ways to manage those conversations and interactions overall. So with that being said, we did cover quite a bit of ground, but as we close today, I really want to focus on what was like one or two things that was really useful for you throughout today's conversation. So if you could, use the chat box or the Q&A function and share with me what's one thing you're going to take away and apply to your presentation that you're preparing for right now. When you're ready, write in the chat box. Redirecting the questions that you don't have the answer for. The strategies around managing interactions. Excellent. What else? Yep, seen a lot of managing interactions. That's great. The time rule, so the 2-minute rule and the 10-second rule. I love the idea of writing the script around the content, right? And the slide design and making sure that we're talking with people to keep on task. Excellent. The 166 rule, keeping the slides simple. Yes, the 166 rule. That is a very good rule, and it really forces us to refine that focus, right? As well as the size 24 text and above. Yes, very good at winging the presentation, but good to always prepare for the logistics. I enjoyed that. That's great. Designing slides to keep engagement and focus. Opening with a hook or story, excellent. So as you can see, there's a lot of different tidbits based upon where our skill levels are at when it comes to presenting. The key here is that we all can always get better at presenting, and we're on this journey together. And that's why I'm excited that I invited you along this quest to help inspire audiences to take that action of how do we actually help move the needle when it comes to work, when it comes to presenting, when it comes to getting recommendations moving forward by making presentations both consumable and effective. Really enjoyed the talking with concept and engaging the audience. Great there. Ways to, great tidbits to get it started. Sometimes it's such an overwhelming and nerve-wracking topic that this helps break it down. Excellent. Great responses in the chat box here. And with that comes the end of our time together, at least for me. I know I'm going to pass it back to Megan here in a second. But I do want to say thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience today. Well, I can't see you, and I definitely appreciate the engagement that you had in the chat box and the Q&A. It's so appreciated, and I'm glad you found value in the content here today. I also want to thank Kirkwood Corporate Training for being exceptional partners throughout this. This entire team made it smooth, easy, and enjoyable, so thank you so much for doing that. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Megan.
Fantastic. Thank you, Robert. That was wonderful. Presentations are always a hard one to really get nailed down, so I appreciate your insight on this. Before everybody goes, I am going to launch a very quick poll. It's 4 questions, short answer except for one. If you could please fill that out before you leave, it'll really help us make sure we make these webinars excellent for the next people to come. If there are any additional questions for Robert, now is a great time to put those into the chat box. And if you think of them later, that's totally fine too. Just send us a message at corporatetraining@kirkwood.edu or send it through our social medias on LinkedIn or Facebook, and I'm happy to answer them or get them answered, for you. Are we able to get a copy of this webinar? Yes, Ashley, I'll be emailing that out as soon as we get it subtitled. So yes, you'll get that from me. Any other questions? Yeah, no problem, Ashley. Fantastic. Seeing none. Robert, you should be very proud you answered everybody's questions the whole time. Excellent job. A+.
No, I just want to say thank you again for everyone for your engagement and for Megan being a great MC of today's session.
Thank you. All right. Well, please make sure you fill out that poll before you leave and be on the lookout for an email from either myself or Corey Hesser sharing the webinar link. It'll also be on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you all. Have a good one.